Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Learning with Lee. In this series, we will be discussing computer science, programming, and the practical applications thereof. Now, the first section of this series, and it's going to be quite a long section, happens to be the general background that any collegiate student of computer science will attain. So, there's going to be a fairly comprehensive look from your 100 to your 400 level, and some 500 level courses. So we're going to start off with the basics in terms of assuming you know nothing about programming, what's an int, what's a float, how are these represented in binary, what is binary, how is it that we write a program and get it to actually output characters to a screen, and then eventually we'll be moving on to advanced items such as artificial intelligence, some more complicated algorithms, and things like computer graphics. And then we'll move on to some really advanced stuff like image processing, which is really fun, but without this background would be very difficult to understand. And once we're done with that section of the series, we will move on to the more professional aspect of computer science and programming. By that I mean things that a college professor is unlikely to teach in a classroom. Things such as how to create a UI, how to create a window, how to track user interactions with that window. And the main reason for that is that most of what a college professor is going to teach you is things that are useful for research itself. Things that either they themselves are studying and are using in their research, things that are required to do that type of research, but not necessarily things that are designed to help you in a professional field outside of academia. And these are things such as creating a window and managing user interactions with that window that businesses care greatly about. But for a college professor, many of their things are simulations or happen to be complex algorithms in math, things that really don't require as much emphasis on a UI, so they tend to not have as much priority with them. However, these are things that, once you've graduated college, are going to matter significantly to any of your future employers as well as yourself. So, what you've been staring at for these past couple of minutes is something that we're going to need before we reach either of those two stages. And that happens to be an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment. Historically, developers, like everyone else, had to use command lines and programs that ran in command lines to develop their software. Technically, if you really want to go old, they had to use punch cards. However, thankfully, nothing that we're dealing with here really deals with punch cards. So, what we're looking at happens to be that originally, developers actually used multiple applications. One to write their application, another one to build and compile and run their application, and then they would have to test it either manually, as well as then they would need additional programs if they want to debug their application. And the goal of IDEs were to simplify this process and really just to give a single point of entry for all of the development process. So in here you can write your code, you can build it, you can run it, you can see there, as well as they also have tools for testing, for debugging, and a whole bunch of other tools that we may or may not get into as this series progresses. However, for the time being, that is really the important thing you need to understand about, is that this is going to be the primary interface between you and the program itself. As for what a program is, it's really just a text file that is human readable that can be converted into a form that your computer can understand. Now, there's more to it than that, and that's a bit of a gross oversimplification. However, it's good enough for what we need right now to get started. So, the first thing I'm going to want you to do in this series is to download Eclipse, provided that you want to follow along. There's a purely optional step, and basically during each of these I'll provide some code that you can do in the description, as well as a bit of a assignment, as well as my own potential solution to it, so as that you can experiment around with it, test out your skills, etc. And in order to really follow along, you're going to need an integrated development environment. So in this case, I'm suggesting Eclipse because it's free, it's relatively easy to use. You could use something like Visual Studio. However, Visual Studio happens to be fairly costly. It's really good, but it is not a cheap piece of software. If you're a professional, eventually you're probably going to have to use Visual Studio, provided that you do anything in Visual C++ or C#, as those are Windows' primary programming languages for developing these sorts of applications, though you can use Java, and Java is very much preferred by the open source community. But for this, we're going to be doing Eclipse, because it handles a lot of programming languages, so just open up your browser, do a quick Google search or search for Eclipse IDE. And what you'll find is probably a link to eclipse.org/downloads. Alternatively, you might find this one, but they're the same place. You just head in, find the downloads page, and then what you're going to want to do is, depending on whether your machine is 64-bit or 32-bit, download whichever one is appropriate. If you're not certain which one is appropriate, just go with 32-bit. It works on both 32 and 64-bit computers. However, it'll be a bit slower and less efficient than the 64-bit version on 64-bit computers. And we'll be getting into exactly what 32-bit and 64-bit is in the future, but for now, if you know which one your computer is, pick the correct one. If you don't, pick the 32-bit. Once you've done that, have downloaded it, and then go to install, follow the instructions on the install. Eclipse has some really nice documentation, has a nice install guide that you'll probably want to follow along with so as that you can end up going through it. One of the things that you will need is a JRE or JDK, and for that just go to the link for the Oracle JDK and that one will work fine. Once you have it downloaded and installed, then you're going to need to download the things that allow you to handle things like C++ and some other programming languages. You might have noticed that further down the page there were a whole bunch of things listed under modules. And those are pre-configured versions of Eclipse designed to handle those specific programming languages. However, Eclipse happens to be modular, meaning that you can basically add in or remove different functionality that you want or don't want. So downloading the Java version, you can then go to Help, Install New Software. Then within here, what you're going to want to click on is the one for Luna, though really either of these other ones are fine, but Luna is the one that I'm selecting here. Then you're going to want to go Programming Languages. I'm going to uncheck hide items that are already installed so as that you can actually see the ones that you're going to need for this. So Programming Languages. Then you see in here these C++ tools, and since I expanded this with both that selected and unselected, you can probably see them both. In the description I'll end up writing out which ones you need specifically, but in general you're going to want the Development Tools SDK, which includes the development tools themselves. The call graph visualization is optional, and I believe I had a bug when trying to install it on this, so that's not necessary. Visual C++ support's a necessary one. I recommend the unit testing support. We're not going to be doing parallel C for a while, so that's not really necessary. Then, let's see. Yeah, I'd take a look in the description. I'll have the ones that I would recommend. Then, once you are done downloading those, you're going to want to come over here and get into your C and C++ development environment. Normally, only the Java buttons here in your Java environment. However, you can click on this tiny little button, and then C++, and click OK. At that point, this button will appear, and you have the ability to toggle back and forth. So this button's not going away. It'll remain there so you can toggle between Java and C++. No problem. And from there, there's one final thing that I want you to do sort of as an assignment for this week, provided that you want to follow along with the development. And that happens to be, you're going to want to go to File, New, C++ Project, and Hello World C++ Project. For this, I'm just going to name my file Intro. It doesn't really matter what you name yours. You can pick whatever name you really want. It'll only really come up in case it conflicts with any other projects that you've already created and you're trying to use them. So for this case, though, this is perfectly fine. We have no other projects, nothing to worry about. You can click Next. Has a silly copyright notice by default, has a hello world greeting and the source. So not a problem. So now you've done that, you have your file, and it'll end up having all the stuff you need in order to print hello world already done for you. And really what you want to do now is convert it from its human readable form, into a machine readable form. And that machine readable form ends up being created when you click on this hammer, which is to build the project. It's a very terrible and silly pun, but it's very memorable in terms of saying hammer to build something, to build the program. So you do that, but one thing you'll notice, this error right here is something that will very commonly occur in Eclipse builds. I don't think it has to deal with having Visual Studio already installed, but it might, so it's not something that you're guaranteed to run into. But the fix for it's relatively simple. You go to your properties on your project, In that case, I right-clicked, went down to Properties. You can also click on Project up here, go down to Properties in there. Then you'll want to go to C and C++ build. You'll want to go within here. Right here is where you're looking for. So this linker has a whole bunch of stuff dealing with different stuff, and one of the things is this library is down at the bottom. What you're then going to want to do is add in this lib path. And the difference between this and this is that this only adds in a single library at a time. What this does is it adds in a directory. So I can go to here, I need to go to my computer, the C drive, or wherever you have Windows installed, your x86 program files, then down to Microsoft SDKs. If you don't have this folder on your operating system, then there might be a problem in terms of either how old your operating system is, or you might want to do some Google searching around for why you don't have this. Click on Windows, go to whatever your most recent version in there is. Click on lib, and just go with lib. And that's fine, that's okay. Apply it, click OK. Oh wait, there was one actual problem there. You might not have noticed it. If we head back here, this only affects my debug configuration. If I want to have a separate debug and release configuration, I would then have to go here, go File System, and go back through that again in order to re-grab that same one. So x86, on down to Windows SDKs, Windows, lib, and click on it, click OK. Now I have it for both debug and release. Go back to the one I'm currently on, click Apply, click OK, and then click Build. And success. So now that it's built, all you have to do is click on this little green arrow and it allows you to run. Once you've clicked Run for longer programs, another thing will pop up that will look like a pause button that you can end up clicking to pause the program as it's going. You can end up doing stuff in order to stop the program, say in case it accidentally gets into an infinite loop, a little stop button will appear. But for something this short, you're probably not going to see the change to the UI up here. So you do this. Doesn't really matter which one you go with, just click OK. And right down here, hello world. And your program has succeeded. To really test that it succeeded, you can just change this text around to whatever you want it to be. So let's just say, for example, I want to thank you all for watching. And leave it at that. Then I can do that, save it, build, run. And there you go. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.